variability. Good morning, coaches. Today I'm going to talk through just some ways in which we can add variability into a basic practice session to keep things alive, keep things moving, and continue to add difference for how how players approach different tasks. So basic format is a 3v3 and different ways in which we can add variability. The first and easiest is really just space, dimension. The size of the field, the amount of space that you have to attack and defend makes a huge difference in the kinds of outcomes you're going to see. Typically the bigger the field, the more likely you'll have for opportunities to attack. The smaller the field, the more likely you'll have to be able to find success defending. And so, the wider we go, the more opportunities around and possibly through, and the deeper the field, the more you might be able to find those opportunities over. So depending on what kinds of outcomes you're looking for, space and how we manipulate that space makes a huge difference in our sessions. Second, goals. When we think goals, of course, we're thinking, that basic traditional, we have our two goals in the middle. But in addition, we can also think about changing those up. I really like to do variations with kind of offset goals sometimes to encourage players to look at different opportunities. Sometimes I will add goals literally offset, so 10 or so yards behind the field really changes the angles from which players have to defend, encourages looking a little bit longer, encourages defenders to have to scan a little bit more to see where they are in relation to the attackers and the goal. And sometimes eliminate goals altogether. End zones, if you don't have goals or puck goals at your disposal, end zones are a great opportunity. Have to pass across, have to dribble across to be successful. How we manipulate where goals are and what kinds of goals can make a huge difference. Third, opponents. With a 3v3 setup, it's a great way to start. Obviously, we could add in neutrals, 3v3 plus 1 if our numbers dictate, or simply going 2v4. What happens if our teams and our games are structured in that whoever scores gets a player. If you score, you get a player, or conversely, you score, you lose a player. Keeping that variation of number of opponents makes a big difference in how we can see outcomes. Equipment. This is one that players typically don't like, but sometimes they'll get the needle and take a little bit of air out of the ball just to make it a little bit squishier. Not so much that it can't, basically roll, but having players have an opportunity to put differently sized or aired equipment makes a difference. Sometimes if I can borrow a couple of size 3 or 4 balls and throw those in there, giving it slightly different equipment gives players a way to attune differently to the environmental factors. Communication. This is a pretty easy one. Sometimes I'll say only you can talk or no one can talk. Making the communication element can challenge players in different ways as well. No talking or only certain players can talk. And last but not least, restarts. This is one that's probably the easiest and maybe the most underused, but how we think about situations in which players find themselves both for success and for growth can make a difference, especially for the little bitty dudes, and the little bitty gals, the 4v4, throw-ins are part of the game from that early age, encouraging practices to have every restart be a throw-in for one team or the other. Great way to add in that variability and get players comfortable doing those things. But in addition, if you're at the higher level and you're anticipating opponents that are going to be playing a lot of long, high balls, if a coach stands back here, plays a high ball in every time, gives those players different opportunities to get comfortable with the uncomfortable situations that they might find. But ultimately, we want to add variability for our players, and having really, different complex tasks that we create. While that can be beneficial, there's a lot of ways in which we can add variability in a very, very basic session structure that can continue to challenge our players and continue to encourage the manifestation of good behaviors that they might see in very different circumstances. So variability, space, goals, opponents, equipment, communication, restarts. Cheers.